Now, we are blessed today to have someone we don't hear from that often, even though she's an integral part of our community, and she does prison work, leads grieving workshops, and is going to tell us about some pillars of the soul. It's Amanda Sherlock. Come on up, Amanda.
Thank you. Hi, everybody on Zoom land. Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me to do this. So actually, based on everything that we've heard so far today, I almost don't need to talk because the reading was about wholeness, the wonderful meditation song that we had, the fourth unity principle about meditation and affirmative prayer, and then silence from Bill's reading. So that pretty much covers what I'm talking about today. Anyhow, so the reason my talk is called The Pillar of the Soul is because it comes from a seminar that I'm going to be teaching that I have been certified in called Happy for No Reason. And Chris is going to put up a slide that shows where the happiness comes from. And if you have been doing the Aging Gracefully class, you'll recognize some of these things. So the home for happiness, the foundation of the home for happiness is responsibility. Responsibility for taking happiness for our own lives. Then we have the pillar of the mind, which is don't believe everything you think. The pillar of the heart, which is let love lead. The pillar of the body, which is taking care of our bodies, which is a lot of what we've been doing in the Aging Gracefully group. The pillar of the soul, which is what we're going to be talking about today. The life purpose is the roof, and that's where we're going next on Aging Gracefully. And then the garden of our life is our community and our relationships. So that's all I'm going to say about that, as Forrest Gump would say. But I want to get into the pillar of the soul. So we're going to talk about 6 aspects of the soul, of things that we can actually use. One is meditation, prayer, silence, nature, listening to our soul, and acting from our soul's inspiration. So meditation, first of all. T.S. Eliot wrote about the still point of the turning world, and I thought that was sort of interesting, especially since he was alive between 1888 and 1965. So his world was turning really slowly. And if he felt he needed a still point, then we certainly need a still point now. So from my point of view, I don't think there is any wrong way to meditate. The only wrong way is to not do it at all. And so I'm going to give you some examples of things that you might want to try for meditation. I struggled with it for years until I finally settled on something that worked for me, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. However, what you may be doing, if you've been doing it for a while, you may need to mix things up a little bit. So, for example, I had oatmeal for breakfast every day for 20 years. I've kind of gone off it now. So if you've been using the same meditation practice for a period of time and it feels a bit stale, then maybe it's time to mix it up a little bit. So the first thing that I do when I start my meditation is to go through all of the roles that I am not. I call it the nots. So before I start, I go, I'm not the woman, I'm not the body, I'm not the neighbor, I'm not the friend, I'm not the Unity board member, I'm not the person that needs to do the laundry, I'm not the people who have visitors coming. So I just take all of those roles off. It's like getting undressed to get into the shower. I just remove all of those things. What I've been doing, what I finally settled on for my own meditation practice was to use a mantra of a couple of words. And how I picked those words were things that my soul was yearning for, aspects of my beingness that I wanted to enhance. And actually how I picked those was seeing how I was feeling that wasn't good, and I picked the opposite. So that's what worked for me. And so after a while, after having repeated them thousands and thousands of times, I have become those things, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. The other thing about using words is that we know that when we're not saying them, we've gone somewhere else. So we bring them back. It brings us back into the present. And also, I find that because I've had that practice of bringing myself back to the present so many times, which is really what meditation is coming back, that when I'm just off the cushion, so to speak, if I notice my mind going down to negative thoughts, I know, oh, I need to bring myself back. The other time I use the words is when I'm getting blood drawn, or when I'm getting a shot, or when something is happening to me that makes me a little off center. I just say those words and it brings me back to myself. The other time when I use them in extreme situations, when things are really terrifying to me, and that doesn't happen very much, but it has, I just walk around the house holding myself and saying the words because it brings me back. Okay, so that's the mantra. The other thing too with a mantra is finding your words. It's like trying on shoes or buying a new mattress. You need to try a few of them first. So try some words that might work for you and just try them on and see, oh, these feel good, these don't feel good. And I use them for the in-breath and the out-breath. And I don't always use the same words. Like this morning, for example, when I was meditating, I was visualizing myself standing here and I was using the word centered. Centered, centered, centered. And then when I was sitting there before I got up, I was seeing myself at home going centered, centered, centered. So they work in all circumstances. All right, another meditation opportunity is to do breath work. And the simplest one is to do box breath, which is breathing in for 4 counts, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, and holding for 4. It's so simple. There are many other things. Someone here, I think, was talking about Wim Hof recently. That's way too complicated for me. And there is somewhere you have to exhale for longer than you're inhaling. That's too much for me. So the box breath is simple and it works. And that's the other thing too with meditation. You don't need to be ambitious. Just try something. And average, as we say in one of the groups I'm in, average is okay. You can be average in meditation. You don't have to be an A student. The other thing that you can do for meditation is find an online meditation. So there's tons and tons of stuff on the internet. You can have a guided meditation. You can have music with something visual like the ocean or mountains or birds or something. So that's also something to try. I have one of my favorite people that I like to listen to as well. A meditation that I learned, strangely enough, when I was in Australia, and I have never heard it anywhere else, is to meditate with your eyes open and focus on something beautiful like a flower or a tree or something. And the thing that's odd about that is that normally when I meditate, my eyes are closed. And when they're open, I have to pay really close attention to what I'm looking at. And of course, if my eyes are closed, I have the tendency to maybe fall asleep. So when they're open, I'm really paying attention. One other practice is what's called the pause practice, where you set your alarm 7 times. They suggest 7 times a day, and stop and just pause for a moment. And earlier I was talking to Joe about the talk we did with Nancy on Cat Stevens, which was called Our Teenage Crush on a Holy Man. I'm sure Joe didn't have a crush on Cat Stevens, but Nancy and I certainly did. And one of the things we talked about there was how in Islam they pray 5 times a day. So I posed the question, how would our lives be if we actually prayed 5 times a day, or even stopped 5 times a day? So, as I said before, there's no need to go to extremes. So what I do is I have my phone set for 10 to 12 and 10 to 6. And those are just random times that I pick because I'm usually not doing anything. And the alarm goes off and I just pause for a moment. Wherever I am, even if I'm at Trader Joe's, I just go, okay, and take a deep breath. And I find that that really helps me come back to center. So really, I find that when I'm off the cushion, as they say, when I'm not meditating, how I am in my life is a direct result of how I have been meditating and whether I have been meditating or not. I find that if I have dropped for a while, that's when I start to be anxious. The other thing about meditation is it improves your neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity are it's the brain's ability to restructure or rewrite itself based on circumstances. So it's sort of like when you go through a field of tall grass, you go through once, there's no impression. You go through 10 times, there's a bit of an impression. You go through 100 times, there's an impression. So that's what neuroplasticity is. The other thing about meditation is it also calms the amygdala. And the amygdala, think amygdala works with our emotions. And so the way to calm the amygdala is to breathe and to refocus, which sounds a lot like meditation. So there's really no downside to meditation as far as I can tell, other than not doing it. So the other way of being devoted to our soul and getting into our souls is by prayer. And many people from different religions have probably grown up with prayer. It gives comfort, guidance, healing for people, for us, and for others. There are two kinds of prayers. One is directed and the other is non-directed. Directed is praying for something specific. But what that does is really box us in to whatever we're particularly asking for, and we may or may not have our prayers answered, so to speak. But non-directed prayer is really asking for God's will, for the highest good. And I think probably most of us will agree that we don't know what's best for us. At least I don't know what's best for me, and I certainly don't know what's best for other people. So with non-directed prayer, we're asking for my highest good, for the highest good of all concerns. And what that allows us to do is to look for opportunities to be open to blessings without defining too clearly what they should be. And then we let go. So that's where let go, let God comes from. And interestingly, when we surrender, we start to see luck, synchronicity, and coincidences. And that is something that is really amazing how that works. So let's just try a prayer right now, and it's a threefold prayer. The first is for ourselves, the second is for somebody else, someone that we love, and the third one is for someone who could be considered a less than loved one. It could be someone that we're challenged with, it could be someone that we actually know, it could be someone that's out in the public eye. It's just someone who we can really wish well. So the first is, may I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I live in peace. And for the person that we love, may they be safe. May they be happy. May they be healthy. May they live in peace. And the third person or entity, may they be safe. May they be happy. May they be healthy. May they live in peace. Another way of getting into our soul and recognizing our soul is silence. That was something that I loved in the reading that Bill did. When I lived in Silicon Valley, I used to have a technical Sabbath, which meant that one day of the weekend, usually a Sunday, but if things were really stressful, it would be a Saturday, I would turn off my cell phone and turn off my computer. And if I had to drive, I drove in the slow lane. And I did this regularly. It was actually inspired by a book called Sabbath by Wayne Mueller. Fabulous book. If I hadn't done it for some reason, I could feel the difference the following week. I was just less serene, a little on edge, a little grumpy. But now that I'm not pedal to the metal in my life any longer, what I have started doing is having a very sacred nightly practice where about half an hour or an hour before I plan to go to sleep, I power down. I don't have a TV, but if I did, I'd turn it off. Power down my laptop, turn off my cell phone, and spend time with myself. And it's extraordinary. I find that I sleep 1 hour longer when I do that. amazing. No, I don't need sleeping pills, melatonin, or anything else. It's incredible the difference when I tune into myself, tune into my soul, reflect on the day, ask for a good night's sleep. It's really amazing how that works. Another way of silence is going on a silent retreat. I've been on a few, and in addition to no talking, I knew this before I got there. There was no talking or no writing. What I didn't know until I got there was also no eye contact and also no thinking. And that was hard. Let me tell you, that was really hard, the no thinking. But it would really allow me to be present. And the worst part of the no talking was when we had delicious food. I couldn't go, oh, this is so good. But what I found very interesting about no eye contact is that it really allowed me to be right in myself. And I was so aware of how when I'm out in the world, I'm acknowledging people, hello, or, it was really interesting to be in myself. Something that we can all do at home is just have a day of silence or a morning of silence. I know someone who has a vow of silence until noon every day. Mother Teresa said, we need to find God, and he cannot be found in noise and restlessness. God is the friend of silence. See how nature, trees, flowers, grass grow in silence. See the stars, the moon and the sun, how they move in silence. We need silence to be able to touch souls. So let's practice. Let's have a little silence right now. So in the silence, you can go through your knots, remove the rolls that you have. You could try a box breath. You could try on some words for yourself, or just do a blessing of other people. So we'll just sit here for maybe a minute and in some silence and just refresh ourselves. Oh, and when you're ready, take a breath and come back to the room. And that was just about a minute. The fourth way of connecting with our souls is through nature. As I just read from Mother Teresa, see how nature, trees, flowers, and grass grow in silence. See the stars, the moon, and the sun, how they move in silence. So we're so lucky, aren't we, to be living here at the beach. Watching the waves, seeing how the sand changes, watching the birds, having our feet on the soil and the sand is such a great connection to myself and my soul. Some of the other ways that people use to connect to their souls is by gardening, or pulling weeds, or harvesting. One of my connections to my soul is going to Halcyon Farm and picking blueberries or raspberries or strawberries. Being there in the soil, being out in nature is wonderful. And another thing, too, is bird watching. I have a neighbor who goes out every single morning to look at birds. And speaking of Halcyon Farms, twice a year they have a 1 or 1.5 hour bird watching expedition where you donate $10 to Audubon and someone walks around and points out all the birds. We saw, I think, 20 different varieties the last time I was there. And I would actually pay $10 just to be in Halcyon Farms for an hour and walk around. Another thing to do, too, is just in general looking at nature, looking at the sky. I was over at the women's prison earlier this year in Chowchilla, and we talk about spiritual things when we're there, and they were asking what I do to connect to my soul. And I wasn't going to tell them I go for a walk on the beach because that's not really fair. But what I did say was, I look at the sky, I look at birds, and I look at the trees, because they can do all of those things from the prison. And it was nice to be able to connect with them on that level, because pretty much wherever we are, we can see those things, even if it's a scrubby bush in the desert. The fifth way of listening to our soul, is to listen and to ask questions. One of the questions that I ask, which is also sort of a prayer, is, what do I not yet know that if I did, things would be different? What do I not yet know that if I did, things would be different? And I have found that when I did know, things were very, very different. It was one of those opening moments of, yes, this is what I didn't know. Another question that I ask is, especially if this is something that isn't what I would like, is, how can this connect me more deeply to my soul? Whatever is happening, how can it connect me more deeply to my soul? Other ways of listening to the soul would be writing. Sometimes I do free-form writing. We also do this in the prison. They call it freedom writing, not free-form writing. And write for 10 minutes, tear it up. And it really clears away a lot of stuff. It's sort of like the knots, but it's the knots in a written format. Something else that I enjoy doing is feeling myself into the future, seeing myself next year, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and asking that future self, what do I need to do today to help myself, help my soul grow for that future state? Likewise, I look backwards a year, 5 years, 10 years, and ask myself, what can I learn from where I was? How can my soul benefit from that knowledge and that lived experience that I've just had? Another thing is looking for signs. So Ramakrishna says, which I love, the winds of grace are always blowing, but you have to raise the sail. Some of the signs that I have or have had are houses and dogs. When I've been buying a house, there's usually a dog that shows up that points that it's the right house for me to buy. The last way of looking at the soul or connecting with the soul is acting from soul's inspiration. It is that still small voice. And we hear it, but sometimes, I just for myself, I ignore it. I go, oh, whatever, next time, or I don't want to do that. I override that still small voice. So there are 3 questions that I ask myself. One is, what would Spirit have me do? And Toyohiko Kagawa wrote, only God knows the secret plan of the things he will do with my hand. I love that. I find that to be so sacred. What will he do with my hand? Another question is, where would Spirit have me go? And finally, what would Spirit have me say, and to whom? So just to go over what we've talked about, we talked about meditation, prayer, silence, nature, listening to our soul, and acting from our soul's inspiration. So in closing, I want to read a Chinese proverb. When there is light in the soul, there will be beauty in the person. When there is beauty in the person, there will be harmony in the house. When there is harmony in the house, there will be order in the nation. When there is order in the nation, there will be peace in the world. So just like the butterfly wings affecting things, our lights in our souls will affect peace in the world. Thank you.